My background is in raptor ecology, raptor migration, and that's how I came to Acadia originally back in the 90s. I came as a seasonal ranger and started the Cadillac Mountain Hawk Watch in Acadia National Park. It's the longest running citizen science program in the park, at least that's what they say about it. So that's been going since 1994. If you don't know, Schoodic Institute is just up the road on an old Navy base that's been was decommissioned in 2002 and then refurbished into a what we like to think of as sort of a modern sort of small college campus. Very small college campus, smaller than even COA or UMM. But we have a lot of modern accoutrements, and it is a place that can house 250 people at one time, so we have conferences and things like that. We just had a Northeast Region Migration Monitoring Network conference where we had people from as far away as Minnesota all the way down to the mid-Atlantic states in Virginia and across the Atlantic seaboard, the Atlantic provinces, all talking about bird and bat migration. The neat thing there is that there's an array of receivers all the way from the Great Lakes east into Nova Scotia and then all the way down. We're reaching into North Carolina now, and they're as well as in the Appalachian mountain chain. So we're able to study movements of bats and birds that have nanotag transmitters on them, and they're telling us not just general movements like we used to know and read about in the field books, but specific individuals that are identifiable, that are moving down through this amazing system here along our coast and elsewhere. And we're finding out a lot. We used to think of flyways as Atlantic Flyway, Mississippi Flyway, and Rocky Mountains and the West Coast. And we're now finding that a lot of birds are actually moving from the west, from Alaska, across the boreal forest to the east, staging here in the Gulf of Maine, and then moving south. So that's some of the more recent neat stuff that's happening with both professional researchers, if you will, as well as the citizen science efforts. So here's our mission. I won't read it. You can take a moment to read it. We're just up the road down the Schoodic Peninsula. You come and visit anytime. Of course, we're a nonprofit partner of Acadia National Park. And so we run the CERC campus and make sure that there's access to research and scientific endeavors that are happening in the park. We have quite a lot of public opportunities. There are ranger-led programs by the National Park. And I was really happy to see in that one slide that you had that it actually depicted the Sea Watch, which is a program I just started 3 years ago, actually. I'm amazed that it made that screen. But essentially, Hawk Watch and Sea Watch, these are most of our citizen science efforts, or at least the ones that I'm involved in with birds, are observational efforts. We do get into catching songbirds in the fall of the year and taking blood samples, feather samples for isotopic analysis, and all the measurements that you want on a migrant bird. So we do some of that, but usually we operate as a field station and attract researchers from different universities, such as the University of Massachusetts and the University of Maine. We have birding tours. These are your typical eco-birding tours that people pay, good amounts of money to go on to be with experts in the field. The twist that we have on our birding tours is that we are introducing mechanisms of citizen science to those folks. So it separates us a little bit from some of the traditional birding tours. So people learn about eBird and getting on board with the idea that when you go out and observe, it's really important to contribute your information to either local databases or big databases in the case of eBird. We have an annual BioBlitz in Acadia National Park, and just recently the Schoodic Institute took over the facilitation of that particular event. It's really designed around a 24-hour survey of some insect taxa. However, we're thinking of expanding it. Now that it's come over to the Schoodic Institute, we're going to build it out and do maybe, not all taxa, but we'll expand our biodiversity efforts. For instance, this year, while the focus taxa is Hymenoptera, parasitic wasps and so forth, we are going to introduce an iNaturalist BioBlitz, which is more for the general public, and we want folks to bring their smartphones or their iPads and take photographs of whatever they see. This then is uploaded into a database where people who are watching iNaturalist, anyone who has identification abilities can look in there. You could have taken a photo about an insect you've never seen before, or a frog or a bird or anything, and somebody looking at that information can identify it for you, and therefore we learn more about the biodiversity. Again, we think it's a great hook to get young folks involved. 3-year-olds can operate smartphones and take pictures. We have Earthwatch expeditions. This is relatively new. Earthwatch is a group that is worldwide. Their model is to have researchers based in various places studying different species or ecosystems, and they get either student groups through foundations or paying public members to join a small research group. They go out and actually conduct the research for the principal researcher, and in that way increase our knowledge about the world's ecosystems and species. So we've now, I think this summer, we'll have 6 cohorts coming where they'll be working with principally ocean acidification, but we also have something that they're going to be working on called dark citizen science. Remember that. We also do workshops and presentations and conferences. For a long time here on the Schoodic unit, as opposed to the Gorham unit, which is MDI's section of Acadia National Park, the Schoodic unit has had, its signature piece has been the middle school residential program called the Schoodic Education Adventure. So kids come for 2 nights, 3 days, and go through what I think educators would call a discovery process. But in the 3 years that I've been with the program, my job has been to introduce citizen science models to these middle school kids, and we have them involved in phenology work, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. They do a lot of work in the intertidal, and there's a wide array of things. There's a salamander study going on, so there's quite a bit to be involved with. One of the signature pieces is the scientist-teacher-student partnership called Acadia Learning. This is throughout New England, generally with high school teachers across the, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. Although it's Maine-centered, this is Hannah Weber's brainchild, and Bill Zellick is part of that. And it is involved with having students as well as teachers be conversant and scientifically literate with data literacy. You know, we can go out and collect a lot of stuff, and we have all this data. You know, now what? How does analysis happen? How do we depict things in graphs? Just how do we interpret the science the scientific information that we're collecting? So there's a network of folks. I think the next one, this is an example of something that you can do in winter. The snowpack project. Here you can see the schools that are involved across the state of Maine, how many students it reached, and these different sections that have been involved with snowpack collection. So this year was a banner year. Not every year is a year like we had this year. So this project, Snowpack Research in 2014 and 15, I think it's designed to go on for at least a couple of more years. Most projects have a 3-year lifespan, if not more, minimum lifespan, if not more. We also have programs in teacher professional development. These are workshops. We have a program with Earthwatch called Quest, where teachers from across the country can get into these programs. They come and again, the Quest program is done entirely in the intertidal, looking at ocean acidification. The principal researcher is a fellow named Dr. John Sigliano from Cedar Crest College in Allentown, Pennsylvania, pretty far from the coast. But when I'm from that area in Pennsylvania, and when I first met him, we had this connection, and I said, Cedar Crest, what are you doing in marine biology? And he said, well, he loves, Acadia National Park is his first love, and he's always wanted to work here. So good for him. It's a good vector to come up here, and Earthwatch makes that happen for him. The park also has teacher workshops, and they have a program called, it used to be called Teacher Ranger Teacher, where teachers come from the schools, spend a summer, 6-week summer in the park, and then go back to their school as a teacher, but also as a ranger, and that's a way of connecting. It's, to my knowledge, it's usually younger elementary school students that the teachers come from, and so that way the young kids are indoctrinated into the Acadia National Park's scope of work, and the kids get involved. And I think now that is going to be called Acadia Fellowship. I think they changed the name from Teacher Ranger Teacher is kind of an odd thing. So our work is, in the big picture, is about understanding and responding to rapid environmental change. We're all pretty familiar with what rapid environmental change is these days, or we think it is. We're experiencing increased rainfall, seemingly stronger storms. There's just a host of things that are happening with the environment and the response. What is our resiliency? What's going to be the response here in Acadia National Park, but even in a broader area? So beyond the boundaries of the park proper, we are looking at investigating long-term change at a regional scale. And I mentioned the NERMAN, that group of migration folks that are studying bats and birds, and dragonflies to some extent. And so it extends certainly through the Gulf of Maine, and our reach with some of our programs is well beyond this even. We define citizen science as public participation in scientific research. So then I hearken back to what Eric talked about with respect to that. And we have quite a lot of programs going on. I'll go into just a few of those. But of course, the bottom line is that what we used to take for granted, we're learning all of these things are changing, especially through the study of phenology. So I mentioned the BioBlitz. Phenology, we're looking at both alder specifically and mountain ash. Those are our two very detailed studies. And then we have a mercury monitoring project, and this is important to talk about because this was getting students involved in looking at collecting dragonfly nymphs from local watersheds and analyzing for mercury content as well as deposition. And that particular program that started at Acadia National Park is now, the protocol of which was sort of developed and refined here in Acadia National Park has now been adopted by 40 national parks across the country. That's big time. That's probably our most successful program, and that is Dr. Sarah Nelson at the University of Maine has been the lead scientist with that. We do the Christmas bird count and the Great Backyard Bird Count. Those are just two very popular things. Eric mentioned the Christmas bird count. I will say that here in our neck of the woods, there's a fellow named Bill Townsend. Sorry, the name escaped me there for a while. Bill Townsend has been doing the Schoodic Point Christmas bird count every year since 1959, uninterrupted. Hasn't missed one. That is phenomenal. So last fall at our annual science symposium, CERC holds its annual science symposium, and Bill and I did a paper that based on that the findings here in Schoodic Point, and we're looking at things like what's happening with individual species over time. So we see eagles on the rise, as everybody knows. Loons sort of holding steady here, but black ducks are going downhill, ruffed grouse downtrend. So there's quite a lot of birds that have a downtrend while some are holding steady. And I will say this about our common loon that everybody loves. Based on party hours, observer effort, the Schoodic Point Christmas bird count has records the greatest number of common loons of all of the 20. There are 28 Christmas bird count circles in the state of Maine, and we hold that high status. So we don't want to lose that. That doesn't mean that when you drive around the Schoodic Loop and around, well, it extends down here and up into West Bay and those places. We see quite a lot of loons. It doesn't mean that we see more than they see down in southern Maine, like around Portland, where they have a zillion people out there. But based on the number of observers and the time that they're out in the field, we have the highest number. So in our phenology, Eric talked about the life cycle of apples, the apple family, and then spoke a little bit about, but didn't really have a representative slide, so this is a representative slide. Here we're looking at the phenology, the leaf out, the flowering, the fruiting of a particular plant, the insects that are interacting with that plant, and then the birds that come and feed on those insects. And we're trying to put that mosaic together to see if we have what was illustrated in the Netherlands with the pied flycatcher, where there's beginning to be a mismatch. So pied flycatchers come back from Africa into Europe and arrive on the scene, set up their nesting territories, nest, and want to feed their young a particular caterpillar. We don't know much about what really drives our local birds. We know what drives their diets, but we don't know if they're specific to specific insects. But it could be very... We know, for instance, that brown creepers really like to hunt for spiders, so spiders in general. But there may be certain spiders, specific spiders, that they really concentrate on. Well, you can imagine if a bird is returning, lays its eggs in a nest, that nest, the eggs hatch, and there's a particular caterpillar or insect that you really want to feed your young because that's the most nutritious thing you could possibly feed to raise your young at that time. If that timing is out of order, then we suffer lower production with respect to those species. So that's the kind. Does that make sense? So that's the kind of thing that we're looking at. And to do that, there's a Dr. Richard Feldman from the University of Massachusetts. We're looking at fruit and insect consumption. So we do things like we go out in the field and we have our study plots, and we count the number of huckleberries, blueberries, whatnots that you find. And then you take a subset of those plants and you actually bag the fruits, and you try to get an idea of what the the wild production of fruits is versus what the take is by organisms, and what the loss is by just losing things that drop down to the ground. So we're looking at these sophisticated systems to kind of tease out what's happening with our ecosystems. And as I said, with the birds in particular, the entire coast, down East Coast, is extremely important for the stopover ecology of these migrants, more so than has been realized in the past. So this is, I mean, maybe old-time naturalists knew this, but current research is demonstrating it, if it's safe to say that kind of thing. So climate, abundance, distribution, phenology. You've had enough of a background on that this morning, but we know that the climate is certainly changing. It's impacting things like auto loops that people can drive on, culverts that water goes through. There are those physical characteristics and our infrastructure that we need to be cognizant of and be ahead of the game, so to speak, so that we're not caught off guard with 100-year floods that happen every 5 or 7 years. We're looking at things like brown down, that is the changing colors of leaves, and then the droppings of those leaves. Of course, the insects we mentioned. We look at raptor migrations, shorebird migrations. This entire area, the Rocky Coast, is extremely important to purple sandpipers, which is a wintering sandpiper that comes here. And Glenn Middlehauser's shop at the Natural History Observatory is principally, and they're involved with a lot of the same stuff that we're involved in, but we do collaborate with them. And then we're looking at songbird migration. So it's nice, you go out, you collect all this information, and we humans become more knowledgeable about things, perhaps more scientifically literate, but what's our response? How are we going to deal with this? Are we capable of changing our lifestyle to meet the demands of what is happening with respect to what's going on in the climate? And the first stop for Schoodic Institute and Acadia National Park is communicating with our own people inside our own division. How does our work actually translate for the resource managers? The sad news is that communication is, I would say, in its early stages in terms of actually connecting the dots and making management happen. The big good news is that there's a new initiative called Wild Acadia. So there are many partners involved with the restoration of the Cromwell Brook watershed on MDI. And we hope to make that a sort of pilot study, proof of concept kind of idea that can then spread across the country, much like the Mercury work has done. So we talk a lot about restoration. I think we all have a handle on what restoration means, but a lot of people involved with climate change use this word resilience. And what is that? And in my mind, it's being prepared for what is to come, to these rising levels, ocean acidification, water flow through culverts, protecting roads, those sorts of everyday things. And then you can jump to how it's impacting biodiversity. Eric mentioned invasive species. We certainly have those problems here. They're not quite as extensive, but things are coming from the south. They'll be here shortly. They're already here to some extent. And so we want to be ready for these things. There's a new red pine bacteria and subsequent infestation that is killing our red pines, especially on the MDI side. So we think that our forests are changing. The structure of our ecosystems are fundamentally changing. Can we be out in front of those changes through this citizen science and scientific efforts that are going on.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Do you take into account the golf course and the sewage system from Bar Harbor in looking at Cromwell Harbor Brook?
The plan is to,
Yes.
is to do that, absolutely, yes. And Chris may speak to that when he speaks. It's a really comprehensive project, or at least we hope it will be. It's in its infancy, but they will be looking at things that golf course management things. Certainly the sewage system will be a big part of what happens in the lower Cromwell Brook. And then I mentioned eBird and NOAA, weather information. There's big data sets, mega data sets that are collected. When we go out and do things, stuff gets put into these big cauldrons of data, and the question is, now what are we going to do with those? Now eBird has been pretty fantastic in the bird world to create visualizations, and you can follow your favorite bird species and watch its advance in the spring coming up, and then its retreat based on this aggregate of observations by ordinary folks that go out and keep track of these things and submit their data. What we're doing is we're combining the Hawk Migration Association of North America's statistics on hawk migration, and with songbird migration from eBird, with information from Project Budburst, and smaller sort of Project Budburst related programs such as Signs of Seasons here in the state of Maine. We're collectively throwing that stuff into a big vat, and these guys, this EMC crew, they're with me on this is a Sea Watch. We wanted them to, so they sit in their cubicles and analyze computer information day to day. We took them out to the Sea Watch and had them. So normally it's the minimum time frame for doing a Sea Watch stint is 2 hours. Some places do it all day long, but out here we do it 2 hours, 2 days a week in the fall. So it was my idea to get them out to experience this. These folks were like little kids finding new candy in the candy shop. They had never experienced going out and standing on the ocean edge watching passing birds. And the day that we were there, it just, a lot of people don't think cormorants are all that exciting. But when you see thousands of them going by in a couple of hours, that's pretty impressive. And so they just were amazed that this kind of stuff happens. And actually, we were trying to convince them to work with us as partners, and that got them really excited about taking this collective data, putting it together, and then turning it into some sort of visualization tools for the future. So this is the kind of stuff that happens. Here we have management, research, and monitoring goals. The folks that are involved in data collection are students, staff, and of course volunteers such as Earthwatch folks or VIPs in the park. To some extent, Friends of Acadia have participated in this. There are many ways to get involved in data collection, both in the park and in the area. And then we have the data that we create, sort of bird phenology, plant phenology, there's climate information, and then there's the physical nature of such as water temp, water flow, that sort of thing. And the databases that are created are Hawkwatch, I mentioned that, eBird, iNaturalist, Nature's Notebook, NOAA, EPA, and NPS has its own inventory and monitoring group. So we combine all that information, throw it into that big vat that I talked about, is actually called a data lake. And then the outflow is to this sort of integration. We're hoping to create visualizations that are easily understood by these users. And of course, the outcome would be science good decisions, more science literacy, and I would hope resilience and restoration would be the next level out there, so that we are capable of responding. And so this is principally with connecting things to having to do with bird migrations. But you need to understand that this is happening across all of our ecosystem values. At least we hope it will be. And the on-the-ground example of that is the Cromwell Brook effort that's going to happen.
That's a great audiovisual aid because it shows right where you are located in relationship to everybody else. And I think it's a great thing to understand that. You know, if I come up here as a student in one day and I get involved in data collection,
Yeah.
it lets me imagine what's going to be done with the data. That's great.
Yeah. Good. Glad you like that. I appreciate that feedback, actually. So some of the stuff that we're finding out already in these preliminary stages, but looking back through time, we're here in Acadia National Park, we're experiencing warmer fall temperatures. I believe you had a slide on that. We're seeing that the brown down is that leaf loss, leaf color change and loss is happening earlier. This is in the last sort of decade plus, 2000 to 2013. And we see that fall migration in general, songbirds, this is actually a raptor thing, but the combination of songbirds, shorebirds, and raptors is happening a tad later. And so taking those three, the birds, raptors, and the songbirds, raptors, and shorebirds, what's happening is that it seems like that where migration might happen, say from mid-August all the way into early December, that is still happening, but we're seeing that there's a pinch, that synchrony is happening somewhere in the middle there. And that's a phenomenon that not many people have talked about. So these are very preliminary data. This is one of the first sort of tools for visualization that the EMC group has produced, and we're trying to truth this out to see if this actually has any validity. But it's interesting, an interesting start to combining all that data. So that's our wonderful building, the Rockefeller building on the CERC campus. Historical records, I'm going to talk about that in a second. The citizen science connections, I've sort of talked about. Facilities and housing, we have quite a bit of that. And we actually were gifted with a new 30-foot sailboat. So if anybody has a hankering to go sailing, let us know. We're trying to figure out ways to use it. It's not really a research vessel like COA's Osprey might be. It's, you know, we're trying to figure out just what we can do with that gift that we just got. So this is dark citizen science, and Eric actually spoke about this quite extensively. But what we're doing is an active effort to revive old, lost, and overlooked science records. So it turns out that, well, I'm old enough that when I was a kid, I was writing down my bird observations or whatnots on a piece of paper. There they go. If I was lucky, it was in a notebook, but a lot of times it was just on a piece of paper, into some drawer somewhere it went. When I moved, the parents took it, dumped it into a box, had enough sense to save it. So I've got boxes of old information. And that's just me. There's just scads of this information out there. I'll bet some of you are harboring some really good information. If you're a gardener, if you're a gardener who kept records, that stuff is important. We want it. Speaking about digitizing records, we've done something like over 1 million digitization process, taking those handwritten notes and truthing those, making them available. And it doesn't involve just one person. You have to take that through a series of people to get it to actually be valid for our archival systems. There are so many records that MBI is running out of room. And they are talking about building a new natural history collection center on our campus. So your opportunity to donate to that will be coming soon. I think that's a more like a 5 to 10 year, 3 to 5 year sort of effort. And since Eric mentioned Thoreau, I should say that this work, a lot of the work that I've discussed, comes directly out of the connection between Thoreau down in Concord and Walden Pond and Richard Premack's lab at Boston University, where Abe Miller Rushing did his doctoral work. And so that vector is sort of straight from Thoreau right up here, and we're working with it, and we look forward to getting with you to continue that effort. So I believe that's a pretty quick overview of things that we're doing. We certainly want to improve science literacy, learning, and conservation. And yeah, here are all of the, well, I shouldn't say all, because inevitably when you do something like this, you've forgotten someone. But these are many of the partners that we work with. And the Citizen Science Association, which I briefly mentioned, is relatively new. There have been a couple of citizen science conferences in the last 3 years, and they've kicked off this Citizen Science Association. We are working with folks from Australia, Netherlands, all across Europe, the UK, of course, Germany. So there's a big array of folks principally working off of that magical word called phonology. That is the key thing that people are studying worldwide, and we're seeing changes worldwide in the timing of when things happen in nature. And I believe that's it for me. Thank you.